Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald in Macomb at the Courthouse Square, where through the summer and part of the fall, they're giving walking tours of the historic Courthouse Square in Macomb here. That's going to include a number of historic buildings, including the courthouse behind me. And Heather Monroe, you and your group over at the Western Illinois Museum have cooked up this walking tour. And it's really an interesting concept because even people who live in Macomb and work around this square all the time aren't really aware of the historic quality of it, are they?
That's true, yes. And going on this tour helps them to see the history that's around them every day.
We started at the courthouse because you said this was really kind of the glue of the square.
Right, yes. The courthouse is literally the center of the square, and around it has grown the city of Macomb since the very beginning in 1831 when the city was established.
Now, in 1831, of course, this was not the courthouse.
No, this is actually the third courthouse here for McDonough County. The first courthouse was built down around the corner, and it was just a little log building. The city outgrew it very quickly, and so in 1835 a second courthouse was built in this spot. It was a small structure, a brick structure, but it began to have structural problems and had to be replaced, and in 1872 this courthouse was built. But when it was first built, it looked very different from what we see today, that it had a different type of roof on it.
Okay, show us a picture of what it used to look like.
The roof was a style called mansard roof, which is, as you can see, not a peaked roof like this, a kind of flat roof.
Beautiful. It looks like a French design.
Yes, exactly it is. And that it was decorated here, this was all tin ornamentation on the top. But unfortunately, the roof had structural problems. It began to leak, and it had to be replaced in 1889. And so that's the type of roof we have now, is a peaked roof on there.
And this present courthouse was built on the exact location of the second courthouse.
That's correct.
So they tore it down and started all over again.
Yes.
Okay, well it's really something. And I'll tell you, one noticeable thing about this is how high and ornate the clock tower is.
Yes, that's a really striking feature, and a lot of times it's been reproduced as logos for community organizations, where it's a very striking feature of the building.
It is.
The building went through a restoration in the 1970s to get it to its current condition, where the exterior is back to the original red brick, and the interior has been restored too, so it's back to its original beautiful condition.
Yeah. On a later program, we're going to tour the courthouse and do a 30-minute program about it and the history of the courthouse, but it's great to get a look at it. Thank you. Well, Heather, we're on the east side of the square now, and I asked you to show me the oldest buildings, of course, which is what you do, and the Randolph Hotel was the oldest building on this side of the square.
Right. This one was built in 1857, so it's the oldest building on the east side of the square. And for Macomb and McDonough County, this is a very historic structure because Abraham Lincoln stayed here. He slept here 2 times when in 1858 he was campaigning against Stephen Douglas.
Oh, sure, for the Senate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we know that he stayed in room 31, which is, if you count over 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th window on the top floor.
Right.
It's boarded up now, but they know that was his room, room 31 that he stayed in. And when he came here, he stayed there, and then he walked across over to the courthouse lawn, and he gave a speech. And there's a plaque on the corner of the courthouse that tells about him giving the speech. And we also have a sign from the Looking for Lincoln program that documents.
This building used to be almost twice this big, and they ended up tearing half of it off.
Yes, when Lincoln stayed here, it looked quite different. It had these large pillars here, and it was much larger. At that time, it was considered a very elegant hotel, provided service unknown in that times, that a bellboy would come and collect your luggage and take it to your room. A carriage you could take down as a shuttle to the train depot.
It was the place to stay.
Right, it was really quite the place. And so what happened was this building was actually built in 2 parts, and this part here was torn down in 1937, and you can see here's an image of it, this part being torn down, and only what we're seeing here is only half of the original structure. This part was torn down in 1937 to make a Woolworths store. And here's the Woolworths store here. This
Yeah.
is 1937.
And you can see what's
And-
remaining still looks just like a Woolworth store.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's very different looking, of course, from the
Mm-hmm.
original red brick building where the hotel once was, and then later on in years it had other businesses and stores in it.
Okay, Heather, we're still on the east side of the square.
Correct, yes.
And you wanted to show me this building because the old Woolworth building we talked about back there actually outgrew that space, moved into this one. But the history of this building starts way before that, doesn't it?
That's true, yes. This building was actually built in 1881, and it was built as two buildings, and we see it together as one building
Yeah.
now. It was built, one part was going to be the Masonic Lodge, and the other part was built by C.V. Chandler, a local citizen here, and that the major part of its life was as the Wynn department store, the Wynn store. And
that was really upscale, wasn't it?
Yes.
If you shopped at Wynn, you had something going on.
Yes, from the 1890s to the 1930s, this was the major shopping destination of the square. It was a really big part of the square that women would come here to shop for clothing. They also had dry goods here. And even back in the 19-teens, they had fashion shows with models would come and walk on runways. So it was really quite the great place to go shopping. And what's interesting is that it started off with, as you can see, the signage up above that says the Wynn Dry Goods Company, but after it was the Wynn store, it went through being a number of other stores, and for a while it was the Woolworth store, where you can see the signage still over the doorway. Oh, this is what...
this is the way it looked in 1929,
right,
when Wynn was at its height. Huh?
Right, and you can see it had the signage right across the front of it that was like kind of its billboard. And then when Woolworths came in, that they decided that they wanted to have a different look completely for the store. And what they did was they put up a great big metal front on it,
Right.
almost like a shield. This was a metal front. You can see down here the words the Woolworths building.
Hide the fact that it's an old building, right?
Exactly,
yeah,
right.
Yeah. In the 60s, there was a lot of this going on.
And a number of the buildings around the square during that time, from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s,
Yeah.
where they didn't like the look of what they considered an old-fashioned kind of
Yeah.
antique, the red brick buildings. And so they thought, make it modern, contemporary, and attractive for that time, they put up this great big metal fronting. And this was up for many years. And then in 2008, the Western Illinois Art Center came in here, and they took over the building, and they decided to take down the metal facing. And when they did, that the signage,
From the Wynn,
the original signage was still there.
it was protected.
Exactly, that it was protected
Yeah.
all those years. Underneath here, it was still there.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's like the building went full circle back to the way that it originally looked when it was first the Wynn store. So it's interesting that in a way this protected and preserved the building. That wasn't its intention when they did this. But now we have a beautiful structure that has so much history that it's been a part of Macomb for a very long time.
Yeah. Marty Fisher, let's take a little break from looking at these buildings on the square and get kind of an overview of where this process is. Now, you've been doing research for a couple of years to find out what these buildings, when they were built, what they looked like, what the specs were, maybe who owned them, what they were used for, because the commission's very interested in, if the property owners want to bring these buildings back to their original state, you want to be able to help them do that.
That's exactly right. We can't operate as a commission unless we know the history of the buildings and what they looked like. We're supposed to be giving guidance to the business owners. But to step back from the very beginning, in October of 2008, city government created a ordinance that created the commission. The commission's job is to go out and create historic districts or find historic landmarks. So the first year, we spent giving lectures to the people in our target historic district, which is about 100 buildings off the square, talking to them about the pros and cons of being in the district. Obviously, the cons are if you want to change the front of your building, we're going to say no. But can we do it painfully? So we grandfathered everything in so nobody'd have to go out and spend a penny. And that was real important. And I'm proud to say that when everything was said and done and the citizens voted, out of the 100 building owners, there were only 7 that voted against creation of the district. So we were the right time at the right place.
Yeah.
So that was the first year. The second year, we've been doing a detailed survey and understanding of all the buildings. In fact, we hired a professional consultant out of Chicago to work with us. But an incredible amount of work was done by Kathy Nichols, who's an archivist at WIU, and myself. She literally read every newspaper from 1850 up to about 1950, and whenever she found an article about a building, she pulled it out.
Oh, wow.
And then I had to decipher that, and you know, you could only wish if you could go back, they would say, well, the brand new building on number 13 West Side Square is going up, that would have a meaning.
Yeah.
But typical, you know, newspapers, they'll say a new building's going up on the square, and of course everybody in town knows where that is.
They knew where it was, right, but they don't know 100 years from now.
That's it in a nutshell. So
Yeah.
it's been kind of crazy. So the next step after we finish the survey, and we're just about done with the survey, we're reviewing the final draft right now, is to try to get the district on the National Historic Register. And that the benefit to that, aside from bragging rights, is federal tax breaks and different grants and different things that come with that. So that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Now what we've done locally is our local government will pay, right now anyway, will pay for half of the restoration costs of anything that you can see from outside the building. So if people want to remove a false front or redo windows or front walkways, whatever, they can get half that cost. So it's a good time. And we've had a good response from people that traditionally would not have done anything. They probably would have set low for another couple of years, keeping their overhead down. It's like now's a good time to do the upgrade.
Yeah.
So it's still been very positive.
Some business owners just want to go ahead and do it on their own. And I think if I'm looking at the Taylor Block building over there, just over your right shoulder, I mean, that's a lovely example of what you can do to a building.
That's a perfect example. And that gentleman did that before we created the district and the fund, you know, to help him. He just, you know, he's investing in the square. That what's good for anyone building on the square, making it look better, is good for all the businesses on the square.
Yeah.
You know, getting that mindset that it's not just, you know, my building, it's our building.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's kind of our mandate, is preserving the cultural heritage of the town. And at the same time, and people forget this in historic districts, also enhancing economic development. So you got one leg in economic development, the other in preservation. And if you go too far either way, you're violating the rules of the ordinance.
You can take a look over my left shoulder, over there where the Encore building is, and you can see that's one of those that had one of those sort of 60s era covers put on the front. That was a lovely building.
Yeah, we have photographs from our archives that it's got a round tower on the corner with a very peaked conical-shaped roof. Personally, I would love to see it go back, but we have that sort of data, and we'll get you a photograph of that so you can see it. But that's the type of vision. Once again, they're grandfathered in. If they never want to remove that, they never have to.
Right.
But if they want to take it down, then
There are
we get a
incentives
chance
to do it.
to say this is what it looked like.
And the commission knows what it looked like. They might not have the
Exactly.
ability to find that out. You can offer that to them.
Well, I'd like to give an example out of the research that we've done just from newspapers. There's roughly almost 1,000 newspaper articles about the 100 buildings on this square. And so when the wooden buildings were knocked down, there'd be an article that'd say the wooden building was down. Then it would say the basement is dug. Then a couple weeks later, you're up to the first floor, second floor, and the grand opening. So we know a lot about these buildings, a lot that the individual building owners don't know. We've done that research for them. And in fact, speaking of the wooden buildings on the square, the first square in Macomb was all wooden buildings. And when the railroad came through in 1855 and 56, the city decided to incorporate at that time because they knew they were going to get bigger, and that's when the wooden buildings went down and the first of the brick buildings started coming up, with our oldest still standing 1854, and for example the Randolph House 1857. The growth really came on all the way up through the turn of the century.
Well, thank you. We're going to resume our building tour now. Thanks for the information.
Very good.
Well, Heather, you often tell people on your walking tours that when they're looking at an old square, like Macomb here, look up to the second floor, not the first floor, because that'll give you the clue on what the original building probably looked like.
That's right, and I think that's true of a lot of historic districts. When you're walking around a business area, the first floors will have been renovated and changed, windows, doors, all sorts of things to make it attractive to customers so that they'll come in to their business or shop. Whereas if you look up in the second floor of a building, a lot of times that will reflect what the building looked like when it was originally built.
Now we're at this is the northwest corner of the square, and we're looking at the Kiefer building. Well, what is significant about the Kiefer building?
Correct, yes. Right now this is a country insurance building, but for many, many years this has had the life of being a drugstore. For 118 years.
Wow.
This was a drugstore owned by a number of different proprietors, but always a drugstore. And so literally it was a corner drugstore, and it was a destination here in Macomb that for many years it was a teenage hangout. It had a soda fountain, a beautiful, it was a 10-foot long Italian marble counter with a back bar that was made out of mahogany, and people would come here and get their soda drinks. And it was established in 1871, built in 1871 by two brothers, the Kiefer brothers. And when they established it, it looked pretty much like this, that the original structure is still there, that if you look at the second floor windows, the three across there, and then up there as the building stands now, those same three windows, they're now shuttered. And then the bottom floor was where the drugstore was that people would walk in. And at that time they said it was the largest drugstore in the county.
I'll bet you country companies would just love to have that walk-in business that the drugstore had, wouldn't they?
Yeah, really.
Well, Heather, behind you, and now let me see if I got my geography right here. Now we're at the southwest corner, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay,
of
the square at Macomb is Louis Family Diner. Now, this has been Louis Diner for a while, but man, a long, long time ago it was built as the City Hall.
That's right.
Wow.
Yes, 1883, this was built by the city of Macomb, and it was the first building for city offices, and the library was here, and the police department was here, the fire department was housed here for a while. And what's interesting is part of being the police department, that also the city jail was here.
Sure.
And that the jail cells were in the back of the building, and you entered them on the alley over here.
So if you look down the alley where those young ladies are walking, if you look down the alley, there's a door propped open. That's probably the door that goes into the jail.
Exactly.
The cells are still there. They didn't want to dig those cells out of there, huh?
Well, the part down here on the first floor where the diner is, they kind of built the diner kitchen all around them, and there's like a great big refrigerator or freezer or some kind of device on. So on the first floor you can't really see them, but up on the second floor, which is now taken over by, it's all just apartments. Way in the back, there's two jail cells that are still there, and I had the lucky chance when this building was up for auction that I went back there and saw them. Had those great big iron bars and thick cement walls, and had a distinctive curved kind of wall to them, the iron bars. So that it really was the city jail. And as being part of the city jail, as I said, the police department was housed here. And this also was the site of a sad episode in Macomb's history, that there's a plaque on the wall next to the alley that tells the story of, in 1930, 3 police officers were bringing in a criminal, and they pulled up the police car right up here to be in front of the front entrance of the police department at that time in the city office building. And they were going to take the criminal down into the jail. They were going to haul him down through the alley. And as they were taking him out, they did not realize the criminal had a gun on him. He fired, he shot 2 of the police officers at that time, killing them, and wounded the 3rd police officer, who fell backwards in the police car. The criminal took off in the police car, went down the street to try to make a getaway, and not realizing the wounded officer was in the back seat, crashed into somebody's front porch down the road here, and the wounded police officer was able to shoot him, kill the criminal, and then the police officer lost his life.
Oh my goodness.
So the plaque honors these 3 police officers who lost their lives in the line of duty. And what was odd about this episode was they didn't know who the criminal was. No one could identify him. So they took his body and went down to the newspaper office down the street and propped him up in the window to have someone try to ID him, and that someone walking by was able to.
That's grim.
Yes.
Especially if it took several days for somebody to identify the guy.
That was back in those days when they didn't have a
Oh my.
FBI fingerprinting or any of that
the
sort
records
of
were
stuff.
not very good. No DNA, no
No.
background checks, nothing. Woo,
No.
that's a tough story.
Yes, but we have the plaque here so that when people walk by, they realize that we had police officers
was a
who gave,
very significant event
gave
in
their
Macomb
lives.
history.
Yes, yes. And so this building, as though you look at it right now and you just see, oh, it's just Louis' Diner, it actually has played a very significant role in Macomb's
Absolutely.
history, in the county's history, and that sometimes a diner is not just a diner.
Now, back when this building was built, Heather, nobody was putting their names in stone on their buildings.
Right.
This guy was a new type, wasn't he?
Yes, this building was built in 1927, and at that time, the traditional red brick buildings, nobody was doing anything like this, but Mr. Zarin decided he wanted to put his name front and center right at the top of his building, show the rest of the city of Macomb, this is my building, and nobody's going to make any mistake about that. And what's interesting about this building had a life that you wouldn't realize looking at it now. In 1928, there was a rooftop garden restaurant with dining and dancing up on the top.
Wow.
And back in that day, a young man came with his band to play here in Macomb, and he played a style of music called champagne music, and that was Lawrence Welk played here.
Wow.
Right on the top of the roof, and also Cab Calloway came at one
Really?
point in time. And yes, and so there was dining and dancing, and the music would float on the breezes, and people say down the street you could hear the tunes, and they'd sit out on their front porch
Oh,
and
yeah.
enjoy that music.
Wow.
And so it must have been quite the place.
They were ahead of their time, you know,
Yes.
to they had trees growing up there and a garden out there.
It must have been really special. And for many years, this building also had a life as a store. The bottom floor for a time was Klein's department store, and it was a Sears department store. And this is a photograph that shows it when it was a Klein's department store, the big neon sign there. And
I think if you look carefully here, you can see at the top, it looks like they have some trees growing up there.
that might be some
Right along there.
shrubbery or
Yeah.
decoration,
Uh-huh.
where this was about the time when it was the rooftop garden.
Yeah, and Klein's. Now that name rings a bell because there was a Klein's department store on the east side of the square.
Correct, yes, and this is kind of shows you the stores a lot of times changed locations around the square as sometimes they grew and they prospered. They outgrew their original location and needed to go someplace larger. Another example is the Woolworth building, that it was in a smaller building and moved down to a
Right.
larger building.
Yeah.
So that kind of reflects the development and growth in the square, that sometimes buildings had different occupants depending on their condition of their business.
Now here's another note that proves Zarin was a trendsetter. You know, we talked about him putting his name on his building right across the street.
Right. I think it's interesting. So Mr. Zarin was, I think, kind of sort of like the Donald Trump of the 1920s Macomb, that he's putting his name, just like Mr. Donald Trump does the Trump Tower and all his buildings. He put his name right up smack on his building. So this building was built in 1927. In 1929, right across the street, this row of brick buildings was built. And these folks said, hey, if he's doing that across the street, we're going to put our names up on our little building. So here, right across the street, exactly as Mr. Zarin did, we have the names of the 4 business owners who had their businesses over on this side of the street. So it's kind of like a copycat, that idea of branding your building to reflect, hey, this is my building, I'm the owner, and don't anybody
Zarin's got
forget
nothing
about
on
it.
us.
Right, and what's great is, of course, now there it is. It's preserved, and to this day, now in the 21st century, his name's still there, their names are still there, and we still think of that as that's the name of that building.
The historic square walking tours in Macomb take place on selected Saturdays this summer and through the fall. You can learn more about the dates by going to their website. With another Illinois Story in Macomb, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you. For a DVD copy of the program you've just seen, send 1995 to Network Knowledge, P.O. Box 6248, Springfield, Illinois 62708. Be sure to include the program name, subject, and when the program aired. You can also order with your credit card by calling 800-232-3605.